Ezekiel 10, 1 through 22. Devotional focus verse. And when I looked, behold, the 4 wheels by the cherubims, one wheel by one cherub, and another wheel by another cherub. And the appearance of the wheels was as the color of a beryl stone. And as for their appearances, they 4 had one likeness, as if a wheel had been in the midst of a wheel. Ezekiel 10, 9 through 10. As I read the description in our text of the amazing wheels the prophet Ezekiel saw in his vision, I thought of the most unusual wheel I have ever seen. In 2014, a group of us flew to Kawasaki, Japan to attend our church's 50th anniversary celebration. Looking out the airplane window during our final descent over Tokyo Bay, we noticed a strange structure below us, a long bridge that started on the far side of the bay and ended in the middle of a tiny island. As the plane passed overhead, we wondered where the many cars traveling across the bridge went. We learned the answer a few days later when we visited the island. The cars go into an underground tunnel. The long bridge is the above-ground part of the Tokyo Bay Aqua Line, a 4-lane highway connecting Kawasaki with Kisarazu City. At the island, the highway goes into a nearly 6-mile-long tunnel that lies underneath Tokyo Bay, the 4th longest underwater tunnel in the world. The building that takes up most of the man-made island has restaurants, kiosks, exhibits, and areas on the 4th and 5th floors that offer spectacular views of the Tokyo waterfront. However, the most memorable sight for us that afternoon was what looked like, at first, an enormous round piece of abstract art. More than 1,200 cutter bits of ultra-hard alloy studded the sphere's surface, which was 14.4 meters in diameter. Signs posted nearby identified it as the drill bit of one of the 8 tunnel boring machines that carved out the underwater tunnel. You can be sure we all posed for pictures underneath the teeth of that gigantic wheel-like cutter head. As fascinating as that gigantic wheel was, the wheel in the midst of a wheel that Ezekiel saw must have been far more awesome. After all, it was designed by God Himself. Each wheel seemingly was 2 wheels in one, with one set inside the other at right angles, enabling the whole wheel assembly to move instantly in any direction without having to turn. There were close coordination between the wheels and the living creatures, cherubim, which guided the motions. Together, the wheels and cherubim could represent characteristics of God's divine nature, the mobility of the wheels inferring His omnipresence and constant activity, and the elevated position relating to His omniscience. No matter how we interpret the symbolism of Ezekiel's vision, without question, it displayed the majesty and glory of God. Although Ezekiel and the people of Judah were living in exile in Babylon, this no doubt was a vivid reminder to them that God was still on His throne, working, moving, and in full control of every situation. The lesson for us today is that God still moves in the affairs of individuals and nations to fulfill His own unseen plan. In the wonderful variety of God's dealings with human beings, there is perfect harmony. He is always working, always aware, never wrong, and never late in fulfilling His divine purpose. What a comfort that is to those whose trust is in Him. Background information. In Chapter 10, the vision of chapters 8 through 9 is continued. Ezekiel saw again much of what he had seen in the vision described in Chapter 1, although additional details are given. In this chapter, he identified the living creatures described in Ezekiel 1, 5 through 14 as cherubim. Once again, he saw the likeness of a throne and a firmament above it, and the moving wheels within wheels that carried God's glory. Ezekiel also saw coals scattered over the city and the glory of God departing from the temple. The instructions in verse 2 were for the man clothed with linen, who had marked the faithful few in Jerusalem to scoop up coals into the hollow of his cupped hands. The scattering of the coals represented God's judgment falling upon Jerusalem. The city would suffer from famine and disease before ultimately being entirely burned by Nebuchadnezzar's army. Verse 3 through 5 are parenthetical, relating what Ezekiel saw before the man in linen went to the cherubim to collect the coals. The cloud of the glory of the Lord filled the temple, but it was on the move, pausing as it was about to leave the temple. In the ancient Hebrew, the right side, see verse 3, would be the direction of the right hand when facing east. Thus, the glory of God was on the south side of the house, the temple, opposite to where the abominations were being committed. In verse 7 through 8, one of the cherubs reached into the fire between the 4 cherubim to gather the coals requested by the man clothed in linen, and Ezekiel observed that the cherub had a hand at the end of his wing. Verses 9 through 22 provide details regarding the cherubim, the wheels, the spirit of the living creature that directed them, and the operation of the whole as the transporter of God's glory. In verse 13, the 4 wheels were identified by the Hebrew word ophan, derived from a root word meaning to revolve. In the cry, "O wheel," the word galgal is used meaning whirl and referring to the whole wheel mechanism. The general impression conveyed is that of constant activity and motion and free movement with no chaos or disorder. Verse 14 describes the 4 faces of the cherubim as being with those of a cherub, a man, a lion, and an eagle. It is not known why Ezekiel used the word cherub to denote the face associated earlier with the ox. See Ezekiel 1:10. That cherub reached for the coals with his face turned in the direction of Ezekiel. The living creature of verse 15 refers to the life within the chariot as a whole, the living cherubim as well as the living spirit directing the movement of the wheels. Ezekiel saw the glory of the Lord move even further from the Holy of Holies to the eastern gate of the temple compound. Stood, in verses 18 and 19, indicates waiting with an attitude of steadfastness and constancy. Conclusion. Ezekiel's vision was an indicator of God's majesty and power, and a reminder to us that he was and is constantly aware and involved in the affairs of this world.
Ezekiel chapter 10. Then I looked, and, behold, in the firmament that was above the head of the cherubims there appeared over them as it were a sapphire stone, as the appearance of the likeness of a throne. And he spake unto the man clothed with linen, and said, Go in between the wheels, even under the cherub, and fill thine hand with coals of fire from between the cherubims, and scatter them over the city. And he went in my sight. Now the cherubim stood on the right side of the house, when the man went in, and the cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord went up from the cherub, and stood over the threshold of the house, and the house was filled with the cloud, and the court was full of the brightness of the Lord's glory. And the sound of the cherubim's wings was heard even to the outer court, as the voice of the Almighty God when he speaketh. And it came to pass, that when he had commanded the man clothed with linen, saying, Take fire from between the wheels, from between the cherubims, then he went in, and stood beside the wheels. And one cherub stretched forth his hand from between the cherubims unto the fire that was between the cherubims, and took thereof, and put it into the hands of him that was clothed with linen, who took it, and went out. And there appeared in the cherubims the form of a man's hand under their wings. And when I looked, behold the 4 wheels by the cherubims, one wheel by one cherub, and another wheel by another cherub, and the appearance of the wheels was as the color of a beryl stone. And as for their appearances, they 4 had one likeness, as if a wheel had been in the midst of a wheel. When they went upon their 4 sides, they turned not as they went, but to the place whither the head looked they followed it, they turned not as they went. And their whole body, and their backs, and their hands, and their wings, and the wheels, were full of eyes round about, even the wheels that they four had. As for the wheels, it was cried unto them in my hearing, O wheel! And every one had four faces, the first face was the face of a cherub, and the second face was the face of a man, and the third the face of a lion, and the fourth the face of an eagle. And the cherubims were lifted up. This is the living creature that I saw by the river of Kabar. And when the cherubims went, the wheels went by them, and when the cherubims lifted up their wings to mount up from the earth, the same wheels also turned not from beside them. When they stood, these stood, and when they were lifted up, these lifted up themselves also, for the spirit of the living creature was in them. Then the glory of the Lord departed from off the threshold of the house, and stood over the cherubims. And the cherubims lifted up their wings, and mounted up from the earth in my sight. When they went out, the wheels also were beside them, and every one stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the God of Israel was over them above. This is the living creature that I saw under the God of Israel by the river of Kabar, and I knew that they were the cherubims. Every one had four faces apiece, and every one four wings, and the likeness of the hands of a man was under their wings. And the likeness of their faces was the same faces which I saw by the river of Kabar, their appearances and themselves, they went every one straight forward,